Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we have three students from different parts of Ukraine talking about their experiences and the future they want in Ukraine. We have Yelyzaveta Baurda, who was born in Odesa and studies in the Lviv at the Faculty of Journalism at the Franko National University. Yelyzaveta writes articles about the war for the Polish media and volunteers for the information project dedicated to the war. We have Victoriia Holub, who was born and lives in Lviv. She is studying at the Faculty of Journalism at Franko National University. Victoriia interned at well-known Lviv newspapers and TV channels. Today, she is interested in marketing and IT recruitment. During the war, she works on the information front to bring the truth to the world. And we have Pavlo Nahorny, who was born and lives in Chernihiv. He is studying at the Faculty of Natural Science and Mathematics at the Taras Shevchenko National University, Chernihiv Collegium. Since the beginning of the war, Pavlo has participated in projects coordinated by the IT Army of Ukraine. Over to you, Yelyzaveta.
Yesterday, I was preparing for today's webinar when I heard a few loud explosions. This was the first time I heard it that loud. On Tuesday, May 3rd, several explosions erupted in Lviv. 2 power substations were damaged as a result of the missile strike. There is no electricity in the part of the city. Fear and panic. This is what I felt immediately. I cannot describe in any words what happened yesterday and how all of us felt. Unfortunately, this is our reality for 70 days now. Explosions, constant news, air warnings, refugees, volunteering, and spending time in our basements became a new normal. Today, I want to tell you about 2 of the most vulnerable groups of people in war conditions. The first group is children. Next slide, please. Russian war against Ukraine has already changed the way children used to live. Due to the war, more than 150,000 Ukrainian children were forcibly deported to Russia. The forced deportation of children is prohibited by the Geneva Convention. However, Russian authorities are currently preparing amendments to the law that will allow Russians to adopt children from Ukraine under a simplified procedure. This means that deported Ukrainian children are not protected in any way. Therefore, Russians will be able to easily impose their propaganda on our children. Ukrainian children are stressed. Ukrainian children are terrified. War is the fastest and the hardest way to grow up. My 11-year-old cousin is constantly watching and reading the news to know about what is happening in Ukraine now. She always looks for an air warning in her area to tell her mother and little sister that it is time to go to the basement. This is not something an 11-year-old should think about every day, isn't it? Next slide, please. Half of the Ukrainian refugees are children. More than 624 kids were injured because of Russian war against Ukraine. In 2 months of war, 219 Ukrainian children died. If the war continues, the number of child victims will increase up to 3,000 and 4,000 children per year. To compare, this is the number of kids in 10 average Ukrainian schools. Next slide, please. I want to tell you about the tragedy that happened in my hometown, Odesa, a day before Orthodox Easter. As a result of a missile strike on Odesa, which was inflicted by the Russians on April 23rd, 5 people died. including a 3-month-old baby. Russian missile killed 3 generations of a family at once. Young woman Valeria, her old mother, and her 3-month-old daughter Kira died in their own flat because of the missile attack. Next slide, please. The only one in the family who survived is Valeria's husband, Yuri. Yuri and Valeria had been a couple for 9 years. A man had only left his flat and family to go to the shops when he heard the news about explosion. At the entrance to his block of flats, he screamed at the police to let him inside the burning building. When he reached his flat, he found the bodies of his wife and her mother killed by a Russian missile that had ripped into the lower floors of the block. The body of his 3-month-old baby Kira was discovered later. He saw it for the first time when he returned to the flat on Sunday. 5 others were also killed in the missile strike. That's what Yuri said to BBC journalists about Valeria and Kira. Quote, "She could find joy in everything. Odesa was her favorite city. She was a great mother, friend, with all the best qualities. It will be impossible for me to find somebody else like Valeria. She was perfect. Such a person could be given to you only once in a life, and it's a gift from God." Kira had been born at the end of January, just a month before the start of the war. "We were so happy when she was born," he says. "I was in the maternity hospital when she gave birth. It's very hard for me to realize now that my daughter and wife are no longer here. All my world was destroyed yesterday by a Russian missile." However, not only Yuri's world was destroyed by Russian missiles. The lives of thousands and thousands of Ukrainians were also ruined, but not only by missiles, but by the Russian army, the Russian president, and the silence of the Russian people. Next slide, please. I haven't been in Odessa for 3 months now. I just can't go home and see my family because of the constant danger of missile attacks. 2 days ago, on Monday, the Russian missile fell 6 kilometers away from my house and 2 kilometers away from a close friend's house. A Russian missile hit a dormitory and caused a death of a 15-year-old boy. A 17-year-old girl was heavily injured and she is now in the hospital. To be honest, this is terrifying to realize that those children could be my cousins, or that young girl could be one of my friends, or even me. Next slide, please. Important to mention that there is a lot of evidence that the Russian army is committing at least 5 types of serious violations of international humanitarian law in Ukraine. Murder and mutilation of children, rape and other forms of sexual violence against children, attacks on schools, hospitals, abduction of children, and denial of access to humanitarian aid. These serious violations of international humanitarian law are war crimes. Next slide, please. The second group of people I want to talk about is journalists. As a student of the Faculty of Journalism, I am interested in journalists' work in war conditions. I kind of felt it myself when I was taking these photographs for my article at the rail station. You can see them on the slide. A young man from Hostomel, from a village in the Kiev region, told me a terrifying story about him living in a basement with his friends and family. They were forced to live in basements because street fighting was taking place on the streets of Hostomel. The Russians searched for men who were helping the Ukrainian army and then shot them all together. That young man was lucky enough to hide between 2 women laying on a bed in the basement, so the Russian soldiers didn't notice him. To be honest, it was emotionally draining to see all of those hopeless and exhausted people and to hear them sharing these frightening stories. The professional tasks of journalists changed with the beginning of the war. Now they must not only share truthful information, but also support the fighting spirit of Ukrainians. We listen, we watch, we read the news, and we worry about journalists on the front lines. They have become our outlet. Journalists have become closer to us than ever. The worst in journalists' work now is that the word press on their bulletproof vests does not protect them from being held hostage, from being tortured and killed by the Russian army. Russian propaganda's worst enemies are journalists. So the main reason journalists are being killed is because they share the truth with the world. Next slide, please. This is a list of 22 Ukrainian and foreign journalists who died because of the Russian war against Ukraine. 7 of them died while on duty. 15 others died as participants in hostilities or as a result of Russian missile attacks. Some journalists worked for Time, Radio Liberty, Fox News, The Insider, and the New York Times. Next slide, please. For example, Brent Renault, Times correspondent, was shot dead by Russian soldiers at a checkpoint in Irpin. Photojournalist Max Slavin, who worked with BBC, Associated Press, and TRT World, was brutally shot dead near Kiev. And Radio Liberty journalist Vera Hirich died due to a missile attack in Kiev. 3 days ago, a Russian rocket flew right into her apartment. In Ukraine, we say, heroes do not die. They live forever in our hearts, but most importantly, in their stories. Our mission is to continue the work of these journalists, to tell the truth for which they sacrifice their lives, show the world the true face of the aggressor. We urge you to honor the fallen heroes by supporting free journalism, spreading the truth about Russia's war crimes, encouraging society and politicians to make the decisions necessary for real support for Ukraine and the end of the war. Next slide, please. The photos you see on the slide are my favorite moments from pre-war time. I often look at them when I feel blue. Here you can see me and my friends laughing after climbing the Carpathian Mountains, and on the left side you can see photos from my hometown, Odesa. For me, these photos mean more than just happy moments. I look at them and think, this is my home, Ukraine. Something very heartwarming, you know? Mountains, sea, our flag, loved ones nearby. This is my homeland, one and only. War changed every detail of our lives. We no longer sleep the same, no longer dress the same, we no longer even think the same. We are living in constant danger, but we work for our future and we believe in our freedom. Talking about the future, I see myself living and growing up in Ukraine and making positive changes in society. Also, I see myself working as a journalist in flourishing and European Ukraine. I want my country to grow and develop. So now I do everything to make it happen. My friends and I volunteer to make a change to build a bright and peaceful future for us and future generations, of course. I want an ordinary life, as all of us had just before the war started. Drinking a cup of coffee with my friends, swimming in the sea with my cousins, going to cinemas, museums, etc. Is it too much to ask for? So we all continue to fight for our freedom in different ways. Ukrainians know that the bright future is not that far away. But for now, next slide, please. But for now, we need your help, your words, and most importantly, your actions. That is all for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Yelyzaveta, for an excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Victoriia Holub.
Difficult but historic times have come for Ukraine. Who would have thought that such cruelty, violence, and terrible war would take place in the heart of Europe? Ukraine has begun to develop. We have wonderful cities, the opportunity to study and work, nature, and fields that provide world with necessary products. But the occupier came to pick up the most valuable thing for us, is life and dignity. Today, the Ukrainian people have united like never before. As I studied history, I understood why my great-grandmother always said that the Russians did not want to give Ukrainians the opportunity to live happily. Next slide. I want to start with our Ukrainian language. Russia has been trying to destroy our language for years. For example, the Valuyev Circular on 1863 was a secret order of the Minister of Internal Affairs of the Russian Empire, Peter Valuyev, to the territorial censorship committees, which orders the suspension of the publication of Ukrainian books and the use of the Ukrainian language in general. As early as 1930, the Russians brutally shot hundreds of young Ukrainian writers and destroyed their works. In the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, Chernihiv, and Sumy regions, Russian troops began to destroy Ukrainian literature and history textbook. In a village near Mariupol, Russians tortured and killed Ukrainian writer and journalist Yevhen Bal. Famous modern Ukrainian writers, public figures, scientists also died. Yuri Ruk, Yuri Oleynik, Oleg Yakunin, Viktor Duder, Mykola Kravchenko, Sergei Zaykovsky. They inspired people with their works. We will never forget them. And after the war, we will publish a book of tortured Ukrainian writers. Now, Ukrainians are massively developing and spreading the Ukrainian language. Our language is wonderful. It is melodious. Thousands of people died for our language. Therefore, we will not allow Russia to destroy it. We will support Ukrainian singers and writers. We will tell the younger generation how much we have saved our language at great cost and human loss. Next slide. I said that Ukraine feeds the world with its grains, but this year we don't have such an opportunity. History repeats itself. As in 1933, when the Russians took grain from Ukrainians, a million of children, women, and men died of starvation. Russians used tactics of the early 20th century. They steal grain and take it out of Ukraine. Today, we have confirmed the fact that several 100,000 tons of grain were exported in total from Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions. In these areas, the farm stock formed for sowing and processing, for making flour, baking bread, is about 1.5 million tons of grain. This is a significant stock. At international prices, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And there is a great risk that it will simply be stolen and taken away from favor of Russia. Next slide. The head of the Luhansk regional state administration, Serhiy Haidai, said that the occupiers aimed to organize another famine. They destroyed a modern elevator complex in Rubizhny, which stored 30,000 tons of grain. This is a targeted tactic of starving people. Next slide. I was most impressed by the support of the world. I realized that good people exist. They are ready to go to hot spots where bullets fly overhead to help Ukrainians. For example, 20-year-old Peter came to Ukraine from Tennessee to join the armed force. He was not drafted into the army because he did not have proper training. The refusal did not embarrass him, and he became a volunteering. Now, every day, Peter exhumats bodies in Irpin and Stoyanka for their dignified burial in the cemetery. Someone has to do it, he says. Next slide. Mass demonstrations have shown that the entire civilized world supported Ukraine. Artist Jacques Tilly, with a picture of Putin and the inscription "choke" at an anti-war demonstration in Berlin. In Poland, thousands of people staged a performance in front of the drama theater in a square in the center of the Polish capital in memory of the victims. People lay on the ground, covered with bags and jackets, as we do with the bodies of civilians killed by the occupiers. Next slide. Demonstration also took place in Times Square in New York, USA. People asked to close sky over Ukraine. We are grateful to the Americans for their financial help and moral support, because America is a powerful state and it will help us defeat Russia. In Canada, several thousand people joined a rally near the City Hall. Next slide. World stars supported Ukraine, which angered the Russian. Angelina Jolie recently came to Lviv, where the city where I live. She talked to children affected by the war and met with migrants at the train station. Jolie is a goodwill ambassador, UNICEF, came to Ukraine to understand the needs of affected children. Of course, the Russian did not like it, and Angelina Jolie was blacklisted. Next slide. Lady Gaga said at her concert, Russians were dumped that day. They are still dumped. Stephen King announced his refusal to publish his book in Russia because of its war with Ukraine. Next slide. At a time when world stars and the entire civilized world are shocked by human suffering, I show you how Russians reacted to the tragedy in Bucha. They made a t-shirt that said, "We can repeat," humiliating Ukrainian children and women who were tortured and raped. That is, can they repeat the rape of 2-year-old children, 15-year-old girls, and the torture of men? They compare Ukrainians to a pig that can be easily slaughtered. Next slide. Recently in Sweden, a Russian woman skirted Ukrainian symbols, and then Ukrainian woman remarked about it. She began to insult her. She shouted that Ukrainian women in Sweden could only wash the floor, be a prostitute, and do manual work. A brazen Russian woman who attacked a Ukrainian woman with insults and curses in Stockholm has been fired. In Spain, at a bar in Alicante, 3 drunken Russians brutally beat a bartender who said, "Glory to Ukraine." After that, the Russian began to brutally beat the man in front of the owner of the bar and 4 visitors. Several women tried to calm down the attackers, but without success. Next slide. And this is a car rally of Russian in Germany. Here, the Russian women show her friendly gesture to the whole world. Ukraine is not Russia. Here, people know what the internet, the toilet, and the washing machine are. I was surprised by the fact that the Russian military did not know how to use coffee beans. They thought it was pasta and cooked it in a pan. For the first time in their lives, they saw laptops, TVs, and toilet paper. They steal in Geria for their wives while killing Ukrainian women. Next slide. Journalists learned the address of the Russian occupier and moved to his house via satellite. This is a house of the 17th century without light, water, and glorious Russian gas. Next slide. When people in Kiev celebrated Easter and developed universities, in Moscow frogs were still croaking. This is the biggest humilities and demoralized Putin and all those who put the idea of a great Russian measure in the world. The USA embassy in Kiev responded to another statement by Vladimir Putin, in which he radically distorted historical facts. Yes, President of Russia was reminded that in fact for many years there was a swamp in Moscow while Kiev was developing. Next slide. I will never agree to live under the Russian flag. My country is beauty. Here is good people and talented people, fascinating books and songs. I believe in our victory and don't want to go and live abroad. I have been to many countries, but my home is the best for me. The war will end and the road and the Russian Empire will collapse. Russian has caused so much pain to people and not only to Ukrainians. Georgia, Syria, North Caucasus, Moldova, Abkhazia, and others. Next slide. We are not fraternal people and never have been, but Russia has imposed stereotypes about Ukraine around the world. Thanks to propaganda that took root 100 years ago through Bolshevism and communism. And now modern communication and digital technologies only spread this absurd idea of invisible and great Russia to the world. We have already proved that ready to fight for every Ukrainian and our land. Our happy future will be. I believe that my country will join the European Union, receive all security guarantees, and will never have common interests with Russia. Thank you for listening.
Victoria, thank you for excellent presentation. We are very glad that you were able to share the photos and the information about the history of Ukraine, which, if you remember, the Ukrainian country has started in Kiev, and it was called Kiev Rus in 822. Over to you, Pavlo.
Dear listeners, my name is Pavlo Nahorny. I'm from Chernihiv. I study at the National University Chernihiv Collegium. Today I want to speak about life in a city under blockade, as well as about the future that may await us. On February 24, life for me, as for all Ukrainians, was divided into before and after. The aggressor country, which declared war on Ukrainian freedom and democracy back in 2014, has moved on to an open full-scale attack. I cannot say that this attack was completely unexpected, since intelligence reported on the impending plans of Kremlin dictator, but still I thought that Russia would not dare to completely disregard all the norms of international law. But when on the morning of February 24, I learned about the many explosions on the territory of Ukraine, I realized that the worst prediction came true. Moreover, I understand that the Chernihiv region would literally be at the forefront of hostilities, since our region is the only one in Ukraine adjacent to two countries hostile to us at once, Russia and Belarus. And already in 2 to 3 days, Russian troops were near Chernihiv. I did not want to leave my native Chernihiv and survived all the horrors of the blockade. Although, of course, I can't complain about life in the blockade because in other settlements of Ukraine, such as Bucha, Gostomel, Gorodnya, where the Russians did manage to enter, life turned into a complete hell. But still, I want to talk about the time when enemy troops were located a few kilometers from the city. Chernihiv stayed in the blockade for more than a month, from the end of February to the first days of April. During this time, the city was almost continuously shelled by the enemy. Many houses were destroyed, cultural objects and civil infrastructure were damaged. Several schools were completely destroyed. One of the leading universities in the region, Chernihiv Polytechnic National University, was fired upon by enemy artillery and bombed by Russian aircraft. According to the mayor of the city, Vladislav Atroshenko, about 70% of the city's infrastructure was affected in one way or another by the war. A dropped bomb destroyed one of the famous symbols of Chernihiv, the Hotel Ukraine, the sports stadium of the Desna Football Club, the V.G. Korolenko Regional Universal Scientific Library, Central Market, and other civil infrastructure. City utilities were systematically destroyed. The face of the city changed beyond recognition. The invaders allegedly set out to wipe Ukrainian cities off the face of the earth. And even on the last day of their stay in the vicinity of Chernihiv, they fired at the regional oncology center. And of course, the inhabitants themselves suffered greatly from the action of the invaders. Hundreds of civilians in Chernihiv died during the blockade. Some died as a result of destruction of houses. Others died from the shelling while queuing for essential products. Many have lost their homes. But even those who remained intact and whose housing was not damaged felt the destructive trends of the Russian war. Many districts of the city remained without electricity, communication, health, water, and gas for more than a month. People's apartments have turned into cold cells, unsuitable for life. Many left the city in the first day. Those who remained then were forced to wait for the end of the blockade or evacuated from the city, risking their lives. Because agreements on a green corridor for Chernihiv residents were never reached, and many evacuation buses were under fire. Air raid sirens were constantly sounding, resulting in many people literally living in basements. There was very little food left, and huge queues formed for water and bread. But despite all the difficulties and hardships of the time, our people remained unbreakable and believed in the best. Whoever could help the army, join the ranks of the territorial defense. Public utilities works tried to restore the city's infrastructure as much as possible. Very often they repair destruction right under enemy shelling. So once during the night bombing, an employee of the Chernihiv Vodokanal utility company died. The mutual assistance of the inhabitants of the city was especially felt at that time. Doctors worked overtime, received sick residents of the city, consulted, and provided all possible assistance. Many residents volunteered to work, delivering essential goods to the most dangerous areas of the socially unprotected segments of the population. Others tried to evacuate people from Chernihiv, risking their lives. And most importantly, everyone who actively supported the territorial defense and the army with money, food, medicines. And as a result, the joint efforts of the Ukrainian army, the Chernihiv territorial defense, and ordinary residents yielded results, and the blockade from Chernihiv was lifted. The occupying troops were driven away. Now the city is gradually returning to its previous life. The restoration of the city's public services became very active after the shelling stopped. Now, practically in all districts of the city, there is gas, water, and electricity. Internet already also works, though still intermittently. Stores are opening. The shortage of many goods has disappeared. Roads are being cleared, and it is already possible to get from Chernihiv to Kiev. In Chernihiv, many post offices were opened, and city residents were able to receive parcels from relatives from other cities. Many people have returned to the city. However, now Chernihiv is still not completely safe. Many regions of the city's environs where the invaders were previously located are still mined. For example, the Chernihiv cemetery Yatsevo. But our team of sappers is actively carrying out the mining work. And the dog patron, who has managed to detect more than 100 mines, has become famous throughout Ukraine. I hope that in the near future, Chernihiv will finally return to its former life. But it is about Chernihiv. But what if we talk about the whole of Ukraine? What future awaits us? The first thing that worries all Ukrainians now and many people around the world is when the war will end. It is hard to say. The enemy does not know pity either for civilians or for children or for anyone. But even if we do not take into account the enormity and cruelty of this war, the military actions organized by Russia are economically unsound, losing millions of dollars every day due to sanctions and destroyed weapons. Russia does not stop the war. And yet, Ukraine's main hope is in weapons supplied by its Western allies and in sanctions that are destroying the remnants of the Russian economy. Perhaps in Russia, the personal interests of influential people will win and the coup will take place. Perhaps Russia will simply fall apart. But one thing can be said with certainty, that after our victory, there will be no more Russia in the Ukrainian future. Ukraine is waiting for a free, democratic future, chosen by our people during the Revolution of Dignity. In 2013-2014, and approved by the too high price Ukrainians paid in this war. The process of Ukraine's accession to the European Union began almost immediately after the declaration of independence in 1991. At different times, this process either accelerated or slowed down. In 2013, we finally made a choice towards a European future. However, during all these 8 years, some European countries did not take the possibility of Ukraine's accession to the European Union seriously enough. Now, when the Ukrainian people have demonstrated all their prowess, the process of Ukraine's accession to the European Union has accelerated greatly. In the near future, Ukraine will be granted the status of a candidate member of the European Union. Well, the next long-awaited step is joining the friendly family of the European free democratic countries. This will open up many opportunities for Ukraine. Free education in any European country, duty-free trade with European countries, facilitated tourism to these countries. All this awaits Ukraine in the future. Ukraine's accession to the European Union will be the natural end of a process that has been going on for more than a dozen years. The future of Ukraine's military security should also be described. Today, the issue of joining NATO is not on the agenda. The Ukrainian alternative is a fortified neutrality that can guarantee Ukraine almost the same security that NATO can provide. If such an agreement can be signed, it will be a real analog of the Budapest Memorandum. Consultations are now underway with countries capable of acting as a guarantors. The Istanbul talks showed that such a treaty could lead to peace, but Russia's current actions do not inspire confidence in such a scenario. In any case, NATO or other alternatives, all this will be shown by the future. So, for the main thing for us is to win this war. Thank you for your attention. By the way, the final slide shows a picture that became a popular Ukrainian postage stamp, which became especially famous after the sinking of the Moskva cruiser. The circulation of the stamp was sold out in a matter of days. Everyone wanted to have a piece of the history of the Ukrainian victory. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pavlo. And we will now move to our host, Jessica Williamson, who will ask the questions that we received. Jessica?
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you all of you for sharing with us what is happening in your country and for your bravery. Our first question is, war is one of the most horrible things in the world. People are suffering from it, even in more or less safe spaces. In your opinion, is it possible for people who are affected by it to live through such emotional stress without any type of psychological help?
I can answer. Okay, so I think people who live in kind of safe areas like me, as I live in Lviv now, we can go through it without any psychological help. But that is for now, because we don't know what will happen next, what will happen in our and what will happen tomorrow. So I think psychological help maybe will be needed, but for now, for people in safe areas, they can live without psychological help.
I think psychological help need 15 years old girls. Yeah, because many of these girls are pregnant now, and it's really the horrible things. And with them now a working psychologist, but it's really hard procedure. Yeah.
To clarify, when you say the 15-year-old girls are pregnant, is that pregnant from rape?
Yeah, pregnant from Russian occupiers. Yeah.
And is there what are their options once they are pregnant?
They want to do abortion. Yeah, they want abortion. They don't want to born children, a baby from occupier. You know. Yeah.
Are there services available for them to receive abortions?
It is a really it's a really hard question, I think, because I don't know all procedure, but with them work now are working doctors and psychologists. So I think they will do right. They will do a right decision.
Thank you for that. It's very difficult decisions to make in very difficult circumstances. How do all of you see Ukraine in a few years, and how do you think this war will affect the younger generation in terms of mentality?
Really, I think that our children, they really hate Russians. My cousin has 5 years old, but she understand all situations that happen in Ukraine, because she heard air alarm and she know that Russia is attacking Ukraine now. So I think this our new generation, they won't be brainwashed like our old generation.
So I think we have only one way for Ukraine. I think Ukraine will be an amazing, flourishing country with European values and with a lot of with higher level of life, I can say. And for future generations, I believe that a lot of children, a lot of teenagers will be dealing with PTSR, and not only kids, but like a lot of Ukrainians will deal with PTSR. But I believe we can overcome this problem. We will overcome this problem, but not in a 1 or 2 year. I believe that in 5-10 years we can reach this higher level of life, and we can heal from our like collective emotional traumas.
I also think the younger generation is growing up more patriotic with European values. The younger generation will remember the horrors of the war, will remember all the victims of Ukrainians. I believe that everything for which the present generation strives will not be forgotten further and will be continued by the next generation.
And do the three of you feel that thinking about this future and planning for this new life after the war, does it help you get through the tragedy now?
Actually, yes, it helps very much. I even start doing yoga and doing sports for my emotional stability, because if you live in a constant fear, it makes your mental health a lot worse. Like I felt it myself. So we need this hope to move forward, not even like in physical way, or not even talking about the war, but talking about our mental state of all the Ukrainians. We all need hope to move forward. We all need hope to be strong and to overcome all of our problems to win the war, you know. So we need the hope, like one of the like base of our
Yeah,
of our future. Yeah.
And you know, now Ukrainians continue to study. We are reading books, people work. We try to support the army and the economy, but we really need the help of the world, because resources of our country are not limitless. We need weapons, money, humanitarian aid. We will return everything, but we need a peaceful sky for now, really, because we can't do something special when we have a war in our country. Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about the suppression of the Ukrainian language. It has come to our attention that a lot of the refugee response, both in Europe and here in the United States, a lot of the services to the refugees have only been provided in the Russian language. As a Ukrainian affected by this war, if you did had to flee, what sort of impact do you think that would have on you, say, if you were trying to seek services and you were not able to find anything in Ukrainian and only Russian?
I think seeing services in Russian can make like a really strong trauma response of these refugees, even refugees who speak Russian in their everyday life, because I think Russian language is kind of is going to this thing where we try to not speak Russian language and we try to popularize Ukrainian, and even my friends in Odessa who always speak Russian are now trying to speak Ukrainian. So I think, yeah, a very strong trauma response can be caused because of these services are being available only in Russian.
You know, Russia invested in Western Ukraine money to people to learn the Russian language, and we have a problem now with Russian language in our country because many people talk in Russia now, but we fighting with it. We will learn only Ukrainian language in our school, and writing books only on Ukrainian. And you know, on eastern part of Ukraine, on school, people learned Russian language. It was a really problem, but now our president don't want Russian language in our country more. Yes, and you know, 2 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin said that he will save people who talk on Russian. So we don't want to save Ukraine, and we don't want Russian Vladimir Putin and Russian language. Yeah. And you know, at the beginning of the war, I wrote to the Russian on various social media networks, and even in LinkedIn, where programmers and many science-related people are registered. And I was shocked. Their brains are so brainwashed, and they state that our Ukrainian language, she's, oh, I don't want to say these words really, and they say that Ukraine is not a country, and they say that photos from Bucha were actors, and that our president is a drug addict, and that we are banderas. Yes, and fascists, and really, one girl wished me death and then blocked me. So for now, for me, for all my family, Ukrainian language is important thing to developing our country, and is really necessary to study here more.
But that the popularity of the Ukrainian language grew significantly after the start of the war. Many people from the traditionally Russian-speaking regions of the East and South are switching to Ukrainian. Now more than 10,000 people are simultaneously learning to speak Ukrainian according to the national program. The popularity of Ukrainian has increased by 500% on the Duolingo service. And this is very good. This shows the importance of the Ukrainian language in modern times.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for sharing how important it is that in our response to this war, that we are sensitive to these language dynamics. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian propaganda has had a strong influence on Ukrainian society. How do you think the situation in the information space will change after the war, and will Russian propaganda have the same influence on Ukrainians? Who wants to start that one?
Personally, I read not only Ukrainian newspapers. Yes, I read New York Times, Guardian, The Economist, and some Russians also have access to them, but they don't want to admit the truth. Ukrainian admit the truth. We read articles from foreign journalists. Yes, but on, on Russia they don't do this. We know the truth. We how can I say it? Yeah, we know the truth because we have access to the foreign newspapers and foreign TV channels, and we want to see the truth. We don't read only Ukrainian newspapers, so we can more information about the situation on the world. Yeah.
Pavlo, do you have a comment on that one, or any of our other panelists?
The situation is definitely changing for the better. The activity of pro-Russian parties in Ukraine is prohibited, for example. All propaganda channels of information are limited. In Ukraine, for example, the broadcasting of the third national channel of Russia, the Russia Today channel, and others is prohibited.
In my opinion, I think the Russian propaganda, and if I can say Soviet propaganda, not be fully gone away after the war. Because actually in some regions of Ukraine, this is a very difficult topic to talk about because a lot of our villages have only Russian television, unfortunately. But I believe that it will be better. The Russian propaganda will slowly, how can I say it? It will extinct. And the Ukrainian values will be the first topic we will be talking about in the future. So I believe, and really I dream for Russian propaganda to extinct.
What is the most prominent type of Russian propaganda in Ukraine targeted at Ukrainians?
Jessica, I'm really sorry, but there isn't every warning now in Lviv, so we need to go to the basement. I don't know if Victoria is in Lviv, but this is the situation we have now.
Please, thank you so much for participating. Please be safe, and thank you for sharing this.
Thank
you.
Thanks all of you for
attention. Thank you so much. Thanks for your support. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Please stay safe.
Thank you very much for your participation. We have just received a message that Lviv is being bombed. Therefore, we have to end this video. I just want to remind the world that the current atrocities of the Russians can only be compared to those of Genghis Khan and the history that we read about. The tragedy that has currently occurring cannot even be compared to what happened during the Holocaust. It was a tragedy, but the Germans would never have done what the Russians have been doing with torturing, mutilating, and deporting people in order to brainwash them. I really hope that this is not going to continue for a long time. And in the meantime, I wish you a peaceful future. Have a good week. Bye-bye.